Hi guys, Zach here. Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial at www.audibletrial.com/cinematary. This gives you access to over 180,000 titles for your iPhone, Android, and Kindle, as well as an MP3 player. Right now, I'm reading Space Odyssey, Stanley Kubrick, Arthur C. Clarke, and The Making of a Masterpiece by Michael Benson, but Audible users can also access other film books such as Hank and Jim, The 50-Year Friendship of Henry Fonda and James Stewart by Scott Iman, or Five Came Back by Mark Harris. Again, the link to get your 30-day free trial is www.audibletrial.com/cinematary. One more time, www.audibletrial.com/cinematary. Now, on to the show. Welcome to episode 199 of Cinematary. I'm your host, Zach Dennis, and I'm here with
Andrew Swafford
and Bill Moore.
In today's episode, we will be talking about movies that we saw this week in part 1, and in part 2, we will be continuing our Young Critics Watch Old Movies series with 1949's Stray Dog, and we are joined by guest Stephen Prince, who wrote a book on Kurosawa called The Warrior's Cinema. And it's a good chat. Dylan and I talked with him a few weeks back, and it feels like he's a kind of wide-ranging, knows everything you need to know about Kurosawa, which is a director that Cinematary has not really dealt with up to this point. Yeah,
we're dealing with him twice this week.
Somehow we're gonna make up for it in part 1 too. So
yeah, we're going. After not dealing with him at all, we're going. The extra mile on it.
Zach's gonna make some enemies in part 1 before we maybe win some people back in part 2.
That's true. That is very true. Let's go ahead and jump into movies that we saw this week. Andrew, I'm gonna start with you.
So this time last year, we had an episode in which I was in the process of making a video essay for Cinematary. That was my video essay about Scarlett Johansson. And I am currently in the same process now for a new video essay. Watching tons and tons of films, probably too many for the research I actually need to do. And I just want to report back on a movie that will not make it into my video essay, but I really like and I think is interesting. By the way, I'm not going to reveal the topic of my video essay because last year Fandor made a copycat video essay around the same time mine came out. And I know you're listening, Fandor, so...
We're on to you, Jared Leto.
That's right. Those Joker antics aren't going to work this year. But anyways, the movie I want to talk about is Paranormal Activity. The movie that came out Halloween 2007 that my mom wouldn't let me go see in the theater, but I got to see later on, and I thought it was boring because not a lot happened.
What the hell, Cher Bear?
So we're calling out Jared Leto. We're calling out my mom. We're going to call out Akira Kurosawa
Love your
later.
Reviews, though, Cher Bear.
Anyways, so Paranormal Activity, the movie that did not really bring the found footage genre or subgenre to the mainstream audiences. That would be Blair Witch Project, of course, but it's the one that popularized it because it was after Paranormal Activity that we got a whole wave of different found footage movies like The Gallows and things like that. There are a lot of disposable ones that my mind has since deleted since Paranormal Activity came out. But my video essay has to do with horror. That's all I'll say. And I went back to rewatch Paranormal Activity to kind of see how it holds up with 10 plus years since its release. And I gotta say that I think I was wrong about Paranormal Activity when it first came out, and I was too cool and I thought it was boring. In fact, I'm going to go one step further and say the snooty, pretentious thing that I'm about to say. Paranormal Activity is slow cinema. I said it. Paranormal Activity is slow cinema. While I'm watching this thing, which kind of relies upon this one wide-angle static shot of essentially nothing repeated again and again and again and again, I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, I want to watch Chantal Ackerman's Paranormal Activity. I want to watch Apichatpong Weerasethakul's Paranormal Activity. I want to watch Kiyoshi Kurosawa's Paranormal Activity. 2 of those directors are still alive. Someone give them the 5th Paranormal Activity movie, please, because, man, this shot is just so good. There's a review on Letterboxd from this account called Ghost Dinosaur, all one word. They call that night shot a masterpiece of obfuscation. It says that there's just enough darkness to cause the viewer to peer hard at what might be happening. You kind of have to scan around the image to find the thing that is being hidden from you in the frame. In the same way that like Jacques Tati makes you look in all the corners of Playtime to like find the gag that he's left there for you. But Paranormal Activity is a movie that makes you wait for very small scares, and they kind of build up. Creating this slow burn tension over time, and some folks have taken against this movie because not because of the night scenes in which scare things are going down, but because of the daytime scenes in which you are definitely very safe, and you're mostly just seeing this couple kind of flirt with each other and bicker with each other. For people who do not know the premise of Paranormal Activity, this boyfriend and girlfriend living in a house together. The girlfriend claims not only the house is haunted, but that it is haunted because of her, and that she has been haunted by this same spectral presence or demon her entire life. And then if she leaves the house, it's just going to follow with her. And so there's these really interesting relationship dynamics, I think, that happen between this couple during the daytime sequences of the movie. They are a little obnoxious, or at least the guy is a little obnoxious. I happen to think that that plays into what the movie is doing. There's a double-headed metaphor happening in Paranormal Activity where, it's about the baggage and the trauma that you bring into a relationship that you may not share with your partner at first, that you have to let them know about later on, and the way they deal with that is kind of unpredictable. But there's also something happening here in terms of painting the male partner as kind of a mirror to the monster or the spectral presence happening in this house. There's a point in which a paranormal investigator or a psychic, I think they call him, a medium, he says that the presence is feeding on negative energy, and so it gets more and more powerful and more antagonistic as the relationship between these two becomes more tense, because the guy is just kind of a douchebag who runs in the wrong directions with this girl's trauma. When something horrible happens and they catch it on video, he's just really excited by how cool the thing they caught on tape was, and he is just indulging in this thing that is clearly very upsetting for her. And I think that the frustration that you as the viewer feel towards him is completely intentional. And I think the movie toes a really nice line that, incidentally, I would say that Blair Witch Project maybe doesn't, of feeling very freewheeling and off the cuff and mundane, while also feeling very focused and purposeful and not over long. I think that you do still have that scrappy quality of like, this is just a bunch of different clips that have been edited together of these people's lived experience, but it also never feels like you're seeing anything like unnecessary, really, for what the movie is trying to do. So I was really surprised by how interesting this ended up being on a rewatch and how much I enjoyed it. Maybe I'm basic, but hey, I recommend Paranormal Activity. I would say go back to it if you haven't seen it, or you haven't seen it since 2007. Definitely going to be one of those movies that gets revisited over time as people are looking back at the early 2000s or the early new millennium and trying to figure out what that era in filmmaking was like. because, of course, the found footage boom was, very much characteristic of that era of Hollywood. And Paranormal Activity, again, the one that popularized it, and I think maybe the one that's done it the best, outside of maybe like Unfriended or something like that. But I've already revealed myself to be a basic. I'll leave it there. That's all I got. Paranormal Activity. Watch it.
Cool beans. Is it streaming anywhere?
That's a good question. I got it from the library. Let me just do a quick search on Amazon. Paranormal Activity. It is included with Amazon Prime even. So, watch it for free.
Or, free with Prime.
If you have Prime. If you're the slave of Jeff Bezos.
Whew. Dylan, you had a movie you wanted to talk about from this week.
Yeah, I did an early movie, Fury. Not that tank movie that came out a few years ago. Do you remember that? That just occurred to me. No, but that Fritz Lang movie from 1936, Fury, that had Spencer Tracy and Sylvia Sidney in it. And I think I may have also watched it because of Merrily We Go to Hell, movie that we watched here, was that a couple weeks ago? A few weeks ago now? That also has Sylvia Sidney in it. But this movie is Lang's, I believe, first American movie. He came from Germany, I think, when Hitler was rise to power, and if I remember correctly, Goebbels offered him a position in the propaganda machine, and I don't know the exact order of events, but he pretty much said, yeah, no, and went to Paris and somehow made his way over to America to basically make American movies since then. And this one is loosely based off of a true story about a lynching, and it follows like a wrong man story where Spencer Tracy is staying home. He's working while his soon-to-be wife, fiance, goes off because she can only get a job in town, and so they're separated, making individual livings until they can earn enough money to get together to be married officially. And when that sweet day happens about a year later, a small town that he fits the exact description of a guy who committed a robbery and murder. And so, because he has very idiosyncratic things that fit the description, like he has peanuts in his pocket that he constantly eats, and he has two brothers that are, and a woman that he's in cahoots with, and basically these small town sheriff and deputy just corner him in, and just he has no way to prove not, because he didn't stay in a hotel, he just kind of stayed out camping one night, and so he just looks like a really suspicious outsider. And he gets put in jail and soon to go on trial for this robbery and murder that he has nothing to do with. And, of course, much like a very pessimistic Lang movie, that gossip gets around that he, of course, is actually the robbery murderer, and the police did find him. And it just, as a groundswell, goes up to just everyone is convinced of his guilt, even though all he's been doing is sitting in a jail, not being able to defend himself. And I don't exactly want to spoil where this this movie goes, but it doesn't end well for Spencer Tracy. And I think a very particular interesting thing that this movie does is bring up cinema itself, specifically newsreel, as a way to show a truthful document of the occurrence when everybody else's memory is hazy and no one wants to implicate each other's neighbors in the murder. So it is very good. It is only 90 minutes, and it is very depressing. I think the very end is strange, just thinking about other Lang movies that end on a really downer note, that he kind of finds a way to reconcile things together, but totally worth it for a very angry Spencer Tracy. I do not think this movie could be made now for very specific technological reasons. So it is interesting as an old artifact of Crime and Punishment. So
Cool.
there you go.
And is there anywhere people can find it online?
Let's see. I was lucky to get it from the library. Filmstruck may have it because they usually have a lot of Lang's movies on there. I could be wrong about that. I'm actually not sure outside of, hopefully your local library has a copy of it.
Remember, 1936, not 2013 with with Brad Pitt.
Yes, that one. Yeah. There's no Brad Pitt. Yeah. 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 Where's my Brad Pitt? Give me Brad Pitt.
Or you'll watch the 1936 and be like, "Where's Shia LaBeouf in that tank?"
Wow.
You'll be disappointed to see no Spencer Tracy in the 2015.
Speaking of Brad Pitt, that's my transition. Speaking of Brad Pitt, so this week in anticipation of Ocean's 8, which I am watching strictly to support my girl Rihanna. I'm watching for the first time the Steven Soderbergh's Ocean's trilogy, which came out in the early 2000s. It stars a multitude of movie stars, including George Clooney and Brad Pitt, but also Andy Garcia, Matt Damon, Casey Affleck, Scott Conn, Don Cheadle, Julia Roberts. I feel like I'm forgetting people. Bernie Mac is in it. Elliot Gould. Carl Reiner. It's lot of people you recognize in this movie, in these movies. The first one came out in 2001, and it's a very tight movie. It's 2 hours. The plot of it is Danny Ocean, played by George Clooney, has just recently got out of jail, and literally in the first 24 hours that he has gotten out of jail, he is immediately joining up with his accomplices, including Brad Pitt, Matt Damon, and all their characters, to rob 3 Las Vegas casinos all at the same time. And these casinos are run by Andy Garcia, who is this kind of venomous, money character. And yeah, I mean, it's a pretty straight heist movie. I think that I talked about it before with Logan Lucky and last week with Out of Sight, but Soderbergh has this ability to really streamline and bounce you around in the structure of a heist movie like really nobody else. It's really astounding. And Ocean's 11 is really fun because it does have this bouncy, pulpy quality to it. There's I think to an extent he understands that you don't really need as much characterization about all of these characters. They're all given kind of, for lack of a better term, a personality trait that endears you to them or doesn't endear you to them. And it was one thing I was kind of thinking about while watching the first 2 movies. I haven't watched the third one yet. But after watching the first 2 movies, was that I could never really see Steven Soderbergh directing a superhero movie, because you look at something like Ocean's 11 or Ocean's 12 and you compare it to Infinity War, which I talked about a number of weeks ago, which is another massive movie with big stars who are all trying to get a set amount of screen time. And I don't know, there's something that just flows so much more organically and so much more fulfillingly in Ocean's 11. And so by the end of the movie and the magic tricks are revealed, it's a very satisfying conclusion that culminates in this weirdly poetic sequence of all of the Ocean's 11 people in front of the fountain in front of Caesar's Palace or whatever in Las Vegas as Claire de Lune plays. And it's kind of a moving sequence. But I watched Ocean's 12 last night, and that is what I've learned is the kind of redheaded stepchild of these movies. People, when it came out in 2004, did not like this movie. And Entertainment Weekly went as far as to call it one of the worst movie sequels ever. So Ocean's 11 had them, robbing these 3 Las Vegas casinos. Ocean's 12 goes for a more global scale. The team recruits one more team member, because it's not 11, it's 12. And they put together these 3 heists in Europe because Andy Garcia's character from the first one has somehow, come up with the identities of all the people that worked with Danny Ocean on the events of the first movie, and has blackmailed them and said, you have to repay me that money that you stole from me from my casinos with interest, or, I'm going to kill you and all that good stuff. And so I feel like the plot's pretty inconsequential. Like a lot of the main points of Ocean's 12 are real MacGuffins. They have, at points, their focus is to steal this safe from this agoraphobic wheelchaired man. At one point, they're in a competition with Vincent Castle's character, who is a thief who self-titled the Night Fox, who steals stuff and leaves this little figurine of a fox on it, and he challenges them to steal this jeweled egg that is visiting Paris. They rob a thing. But at the end of the day, this movie is so strangely structured. It's a massive tentpole, but it moves at the pace of kind of like a Fellini movie. At times, this movie feels like something that Fellini directed. At times, this feels like Carol Reed's The Third Man. It has this strange, offbeat rhythm to it compared to the very tightly structured first movie that I can see 100% why people were deeply turned off by this. It seems so uninterested in keeping a focus structured, and it just bounces around, and it has these strange moments where these very strong Italian string songs will play as if it's some some culmination of a romance in a Fellini movie with these swooping zooms, and it's, I don't know where those fit into the line of thinking for a movie about these guys stealing stuff. At times it'll just divulge into weird kind of technical jargon that about stealing stuff that I don't know who they're talking to, because it's not like we as the normal movie viewing public knows what the ins and outs of heist and stealing priceless artifacts would be. It's just they want us to be able for us to take notes during the movie. Yeah, it's such a strange movie, and it just I liked Roger Ebert had a line about it. He says the movie is all about behavior, dialogue, star power, and wise ass and jokes. I really sort of liked it, and I kind of feel the same way. Like I'm doing a just terrible, horrible job of explaining this movie, but it's a somewhat unexplainable like thing. Again, I can see why people were upset when they went to see this, because they're like, okay, Ocean's 11, they got to steal stuff and that's the goal. But there really is no goal in Ocean's 12. The goal is more the experience of this of these big movie stars like George Clooney and Julia Roberts and Brad Pitt all coming together. It has this wonderful early 2000s digital twinge to it. You can feel the beginnings of Soderbergh's deep affection for digitalness. It has almost this VCR quality to it. It feels like it should be a giant poster or a standee in a Blockbuster store, and there's something kind of pastiche and charming about that. Like it feels like this deeply early 2000s artifact that somehow has kind of found an age to it, because now movies feel so calculated and feel so structured to you have to have so much prior knowledge in order to come to one movie. And this one, while it's a sequel to a movie, and it does have a little bit of an in joke in knowing these characters over the course of now 4 hours up to this point, there's this kind of looseness to it that is really strange for a movie that's such a big property and was such a kind of a coming together of really the biggest names in Hollywood at that point in time. So I don't know if you haven't watched Ocean's 12 since 2004 and didn't like it, I think that you should kind of reconsider and check it out. I really enjoyed it. I'm hoping with Ocean's 8 that it kind of carries the spirit of, again, just being this really jovial, really entertaining, somewhat hangout, somewhat problem-solving tentpole movie. I wish we could have more successful versions of this, and I feel like Soderbergh is one who just is able to capture a lot of old Hollywood sensibilities and inject it into our new wave of movies without making it feel either like he's constantly referencing other things. It feels so original. It feels so fresh. But yeah, Ocean's 12. I recommend it. It's
How'd you watch it, Zach?
Wherever you find your movies these days, that's where it's at.
Streaming everywhere.
Make some enemies, Zach.
Yeah, let's make some enemies. So we're going to be talking about Akira Kurosawa in the second half of the podcast. But so I've actually, we talk about Stray Dog in the second part, and that was the first Kurosawa movie I had seen, like, just ever. Like, it was just one of those. I had not watched any of his movies up to this point. I don't know. It's difficult to be keeping.
There's a lot.
Yeah, there's a lot of them. You kind of want to. I don't know. It was kind of nice. I was just waiting, and I was like, fine, this will be the right time to just kind of dig into them. I think that there's no rush to watch everything immediately. There's so much stuff. Take your time. That's all. That's my PSA to the kids. Anyway, so after I watched Stray Dog, I'm gonna start kind of working through a lot of the rest of Kurosawa's filmography. A lot of it is on Filmstruck right now, and one of those that is on Filmstruck is 1950s Rashomon, which I feel like is almost more than just a movie. It's kind of taken on this whole life of its own as this concept. I read
psychological phenomenon.
It is, yeah, and it's interesting. Our guest Stephen Prince actually has a piece for Criterion talking about Rashomon when it came out in the Criterion Collection, and just the impact it had, because this was the movie that really entered Kurosawa into the international landscape. It played at Cannes and it played at Venice, and it was winning all of these awards, and it brought Kurosawa up to the level of like Fellini and Antonini and all of these other massive art house European directors, but
before them, for sure.
Yes, but before them. But yeah, so Rashomon, for those who do not know what the plot is, you pick up after most of the events have taken place. There is a woodcutter and a priest who are sitting under the Rashomon gate outside of, I think, Kyoto in Japan, and it is pouring down rain, and just a random person runs up and seeks shelter, and is kind of struck by how dejected these two men are, and is asking, pretty much what's your deal? And they respond that they've just heard this incredible story and are just kind of struck by its pervasive, how evocative and how terrifying it is. And the story is they have brought this bandit played by one of the stars of our part 2 movie Stray Dog, Toshiro Mifune. He is a bandit who has allegedly killed a man and raped the man's wife. And over the course of the next 30, 45 hour long runtime, we go through the events as witnessed by first the woodcutter, which I'll get back to his retelling in a second. Then the priest. Then you hear from the bandit. Then you hear from the medium of the dead husband, which that is just wonderful. Like it's super obscure and just kind of comes out of left field, but I loved it. And then the wife tells her story, but the first story is the woodcutter recounting how he comes across the dead body, and it's this. It's been written and talked about a lot, but it's this deeply visceral, almost. Stephen Prince in his piece for Criterion talked about how it feels almost like you're entering from you're leaving reality and entering this dreamland. You have this wonderfully almost fairy tale lullaby melody that plays as he rushes through the trees. And Kurosawa did something that you didn't generally see in movies up to that point, which was he pointed the camera at the sun, causing these lens flares and making it seem almost like this ascension into this celestial place. And
you're saying a lot of nice things about this movie, Zach.
Just wait,
man.
And it was that part was really like it was one of those moments, and I think we touched on it. Dylan and I touched on it in part 2, but it was one of those moments where you understand why Kurosawa is this director that kind of has such a legacy, a name behind him. Why people constantly link him to the idea of the peak of cinema. And I get why people find Rashomon so powerful, and I can understand why it was so provocative in 1950. Spoiler alert, I guess. After these characters recount these stories, of course there's a little unreliable narrator, because you have these 3 different people who are all affected by the said story that are retelling it. And at the end, the woodcutter reveals that he actually saw how everything kind of took place, and how it wasn't really how it was a little bit of everybody's story, but it was all kind of pieced together, and it didn't really necessarily have the bravado that each of these characters really associated with each one of them. You have the way that the actual crime takes place is much less legendary than the legends that these people have told, and these people and ghost medium person have told.
Do you find out the definitive true version of how it happens? I thought the whole point of the movie was that you never find out how it actually happened.
I grasp that the point of the movie is that it's difficult to trust memory, and that truth is very subjective, and we never, of course, know what definitively happened that day. Do we believe the woodcutter story? Do we believe any of the other witnesses' stories? We don't really know what happened and who's getting away with what, and we kind of end on this strange note of as the stories wind down, the random citizen guy, they have finished the story, and they hear this crying baby, and they all rush to the back of the gate and come across this baby that's sitting next to this kimono. And the random citizen guy grabs the kimono and is about to run off, and they're just like, "What are you doing?" And he's just, he's like, "I'm saving my skin. I'm looking out for myself. That's what you do." And leaves, and the woodcutter says, admits, "I have multiple kids. I can take care of this kid," even though the priest is initially reticent to just trust a person after hearing all of these stories. And he goes, "Well, after after seeing your humility in this moment, in showing that you will take care of this lost child, I've found faith in humanity again. And the rain parts away, and the woodcutter takes the child and walks off. And I don't know, there just was something empty to me about that
Sure.
conclusion we came to, that all of these stories, that we can't know the truth, but there are these slivers of hope and humanity that speak to why we're optimistic about life. And honestly, and this gets into kind of the discussion we had in part 2, but I kind of found it to be much more effective in Stray Dog than in Rashomon, because the end of Stray Dog feels like you still kind of have a, quote, tidy, tie 'em up ending, but there's this ambiguity to how it ends. It ends a little uncertain, a little messy, but at the same time, it's not like you're completely it's not like you're completely battered or beat up by the events. You just kind of feel a little bit gutless and just kind of stricken by how you make life, how you make of life at that point in time. And I felt like Rashomon kind of took this much more optimistic route that it didn't really seem like it was trying to work toward. So I don't know. I really was. There was so much that I enjoyed technically about this movie, but I just found the story to be not as effective as people have made it out to be. And yeah, like I said, I think that I just felt like Stray Dog deals with morality and deals with the kind of grayness of humanity in a much more effective way.
Do you think at least some of that has to do with the setting? Just thinking about a perspective of like finding a way to immediately connect with the story that's being told. The difference between a relatively peasant society that we're seeing in Rashomon, and them telling a tale back and forth together, that we get in enough of an idea of what their living situation's like. But when we watch Stray Dog, as it's more contemporary to us, even though it's set in a different country, that it's like you have a stronger notion of a person's life, while Rashomon feels like so far away. So what do you think?
Maybe, but I also think that Rashomon, and this is to Kurosawa's, he does a good. This is smart of him. The crime and the, it's a very simple crime. Somebody was killed, somebody was raped. That seems to be the crime. It's very cut and dry. There's the moral ambiguity is more in those moments when you're exploring and more about the character. But I feel like you don't need that much information on where these characters came from before or their situation. I think that the basicness of both the crime and their archetypes, the kind of, the bandit, the dutiful husband, and the wife who is trying to who feels torn between this whole event. I think it's pretty cookie cutter and it's pretty basic, but I think that's by design, and I think that works to its detriment, or it works to its point.
Gotcha. I mean, I guess I was mostly just thinking about how much it seemed that Stray Dog affected you more. I mean, maybe like it had set up its tension and dichotomy between two characters against, looking for this guy who took, Mifune's character's gun. But here, this is like intentionally fragmenting it out of your control, even though you're supposed to glimmer some version of hope at it at the end. But it doesn't, that doesn't make sense considering what you just, retold the parts of the story, that and in no way could that get to that point of optimism after just cutting the truth down in its entirety, right? So, I mean, maybe there's more of an ambivalency in Stray Dog that you can hold on to than whatever message Rashomon may hold on to at the end of it.
I think also, and I hate this association, but whatever, I'll play the card. I also think I was more affected by Stray Dog than Rashomon because I think that questioning truth and morality in 2018 is a little bit different than in 1946 and 1950.
Yeah. I understand that entirely. I made a similar I made a similar point when we talked about F for Fake, when we did our documentary series of like, I feel like I need something to hold on to right now. So just subverting all sense of reality is hard for me to get excited by, no matter how flashy.
Yeah, and that's how I felt about Rashomon. While Stray Dog, I felt like the ending, nobody's left in this great, even though the thing is solved and there is a conclusion to the story that has taken place, nobody feels like they've necessarily improved in their situation because of it. And there is this kind of bitterness. I mean, Dylan, we talk about the last line that that Shimara's detective tells to Mifune in part 2, so I won't go into it much. But there is this bitterness kind of to the whole story that I found just much more affecting. And again, I don't like it, but I feel like it's just more a product of my environment at this point in time. Maybe I'll come back to Rashomon and find more, but at this right now, that's just how I kind of gleaned from it.
Which is funny considering that he plays the woodcutter in this movie, right? Like there's like a different kind of cynicism that his character holds in both of them, but I think the fact that like he is decidedly the unreliable narrator in this one is kind of funny, even though, you know, to our points that it's like more exhausting to watch this movie than it is insightful and interesting than when it came out and shortly after. But I don't know. Hey, if you were able to catch it on the big screen, if you're able to catch a good movie, old movie on the big screen, kind of hard to not do that.
I'm a big fan of Rashomon. I really like it, but I think that the main difference between Zach and I's relationship to the movie is that I don't see it as optimistic at all. Like, maybe this was just due to Zach thinking that the movie does seem to offer some sort of definitive version of the events near the end. I felt like the movie was throwing up its hands in despair at the end of like how truth is so elusive. And though I don't necessarily think that's a comforting thought right now, it is a relatable thought right now.
Yeah. There's probably a way that I think, to Zach's point, that you can look at how all the stories are told and its relation to the person telling it, that you're like, probably there's like a way to like piecemeal a version of it that's the most likely version of the story, even though, to your point, Andrew, that it's just like, it's kind of, as you said, more or less throws up its hand. It's like, look, we're going to tell all these stories, but obviously we don't really know the answers, so raise this baby, because that's all you can do. Ha ha! Anyway, part 2 is going to be good in its own unique way. Sans Rashomon.
It is.
Yep.
Well, let's go ahead and head that way. After a short break, we will be talking about Stray Dogs, so stick around.
Hello, Cinematary listeners. This is Andrew Swafford with an important message during this break in the show. Cinematary would like you to know that we do not want your money, and we don't want to place ads in the show at this time. That's not why we do this. We do it because we enjoy each other's company and because we want to bring you our pure, unadulterated opinions on the world of cinema. However, there are a few things you can do to help out the show that we would greatly appreciate. Firstly, leave us a review on iTunes, preferably a positive one, because the algorithm gods tell us that reviews increase our podcast's exposure. Secondly, send us a tweet at Cinematary Or better yet, send an email to cinematary@yahoo.com so that we can hear from you guys for a change. Maybe you think I'm an idiot for not liking Singing in the Rain, or maybe you have a suggestion of a movie that you really want to hear our opinion on. Regardless, let us know your thoughts, and we'll read them out and respond to them on future episodes of Cinematary. Finally, please share the show with friends and members of your family who you think would enjoy listening to and participating in our film discussions we bring to you guys every week. So to recap, review, send us your thoughts through Twitter and email, and share with your friends and family. We would truly appreciate it. Thanks for listening. Now let's get back to the show.
And we're back with part 2 of episode 199 of Cinematary. In this part, we will be continuing our Young Critics Watch Old Movies series with 1949's Stray Dog. But joining us today to talk about the film from the Virginia Tech University, Professor Stephen Prince, who wrote a book on Kurosawa, the Warrior Cinema. Professor Prince, thank you so much for coming on and talking with us.
It's my pleasure.
So, real quickly, Stray Dog, it's one of Kurosawa's early films, and pretty much the story is you have this young, inexperienced detective on the police force in Tokyo, and one day he's riding on the bus, and it's hot, and it's the summer, and he discovers that his gun was stolen out of its holster, and so he is going around town trying to find where his gun is, and that whole thing kind of has to become more important because he learns that his gun was used for a robbery and for a murder. But just kind of jumping straight into the movie, I wanted to first talk about Kurosawa as a director because this is actually the first time that this podcast has talked about him in any of his movies, and this is kind of early on in his career. So I guess as someone who has studied him, what are some of the quote Kurosawa touches? What are some of the elements that would later become so synonymous with him that you kind of saw in this film as well as the rest of his early work?
Well, in this film, there are any number of recognizable elements. I mean, he has already created a very strong stylistic signature that kind of defines his presence as director, and also an area of focus. In this period, he's looking at the immediate post-war social and economic devastation in Japan, and he's making and has made a series of films about the challenges of recovering from that huge apocalypse that the war became for Japan. And so Stray Dog kind of comes in the middle of that. Kurosawa had made a number of films during the war, and then his creative instincts were kind of unleashed after the war during the occupation by the Allied powers. And it seemed like he really responded to the kind of imaginative challenges of making movies about what the country was going through. And part of what makes them special is that the best of these movies are about existential choices that are thrust upon characters, like our detective, Murakami, in Stray Dog, whose pistol is stolen. And he comes to feel personally responsible for the crimes that it is being used to commit. And this begins what in the film is an epic journey through urban Japan as he searches for the increasingly savage criminal who is in possession of his gun. And it becomes an internal journey as well, as Murakami moves from a position of being impulsive and relatively self-centered to learning to see the way that his actions affect other people, and learning to be a much better cop than he has been.
To bounce off that, then
the irony in the film, of course, is that as his search deepens, he comes to feel an increasingly strong connection to the criminal. He realizes that they are very much alike. They're both veterans of the war who came back impoverished with nothing, and that what distinguishes them is that one chose a life of crime, and the other, Murakami, chose to become a police officer.
Right. And to bounce off that, then to your point about post-war Japan, that it's interesting how much time and montage that he spends in him finding a pistol dealer, right? After the first occurrence of trying to talk to Ogen, a pickpocket who passed off his gun, she leads him to the black market in Ueno, right? And how much Kurosawa spends in montage, just like Murakami walking among all of those stands and just feels slowly claustrophobic among all the people just kind of lounging around, right? Yeah.
And that's an extraordinarily long time for this kind of a scene. It's a series of shots connected by wipes of Toshiro Mifune, the actor playing Murakami, walking through what were then actual black market districts. So there's a real kind of almost documentary aspect to the scene, because you see a lot of people who are not actors, a lot of people who are really just on the streets, down and out. And they were using a hidden camera to capture a lot of those images. So it's about, part of it's kind of about Kurosawa just getting out into the streets and showing us what things looked like in that period.
And to your point about the internal journey, then, that it also like goes into this really claustrophobic close-up on Mifune of all of these people like converging into his head, right? There's a great superimposition of like crowds coming at every diagonal while Mifune is like looking very paranoid and worried that he might not end up finding the pistol dealers and his gun. So I think, yeah, to your point, that it like converges both of those points about an external journey into the streets and then also his journey as a cop.
I think what the scene also shows is that he is a very determined individual, and this is characteristic of Kurosawa's heroes in this period of his movies. And the fact that the scene goes on as long as it does, it becomes a portrait of this determination that he's not going to give up. He's going to stay out there in these miserable surroundings, living amongst the poor and dispossessed until he finds that gun.
Right.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned before that this is looking at post-war Japan. It seems like Kurosawa definitely has a different way of portraying that era as some of his contemporaries and some older filmmakers, somebody like Mizoguchi or Ozu. I'm thinking specifically of Ozu, who seems to kind of mention it, but he never really interrogates it. What do you make of how Kurosawa deals with post-war Japan, kind of compared to other Japanese directors at that time?
Well, different directors had different responses to that, and Kurosawa, I think, is pretty clear in being focused on the immediate post-war period and the difficulty of recovering from the war, and also trying to make movies that will suggest some of the important things that people ought to do, such as make the right choices, right? It's an existential situation, and what you are what you make of yourself. He really believes that. He was a very secular filmmaker, and he really believed in living fully in this present moment. So his films are about making the right choices, and the limitation of this is that he doesn't, in his movies, connect the past to the present. And what I mean by that is that take a director like Masaki Kobayashi, who did Harakiri and The Human Condition. Kobayashi's Harakiri is a samurai film that is about the connection between the country's military heritage and this huge debacle of the war. the connection between the ideology of the samurai and the modern military fighting in Asia and the Pacific. And Kurosawa never did that. He made a lot of samurai movies, and he's very famous for that. But and they're historically very accurate. But for Kurosawa, he uses the samurai past to talk about more kind of cosmic issues, not so much about how that past led the nation into a certain predicament in the 20th century. So I think he was very remarkable for being very active in using movies after the war to talk about that situation of recovery. But at the same time, he didn't make the connection in his work between the samurai heritage and its modern incarnation in the Imperial Japanese Army at war.
Do you think that tension then shows itself indirectly, that somehow in his films that kind of bring up those similar values, but aren't directly addressed, as you say, that it kind of either causes a vacuum or a hole in his movies and his moral narratives that kind of force it into a tense space?
I'm not quite sure I'm following your question.
So, somebody like Mifune, who goes on to play both samurai and, in this case, a contemporary detective, kind of shows a struggle of kind of more of a narcissistic individualist value, but isn't it in some way then cause a tension with the traditional values that kind of show itself in the periphery then in his stories? Yeah.
Indeed, yeah. And one of the things that the Allied powers aimed to do was to instill individualism and individual values in a culture that was very very hierarchical and very group oriented. And Kurosawa embraced that. So in his movies, you get very strong individual characters who are challenging a lot of the norms of everyday behavior. And I think that was a radical gesture on Kurosawa's part. And I think it's also why he was so unleashed in this period, is that what he believed was very much in harmony, in sync with this political moment. And so the movies he was making were, exactly what filmmakers are being told they should be making. But in Kurosawa's case, it wasn't opportunistic. He genuinely believed these things. And so, yeah, a lot of it is really interesting. You see the sort of the conflicts. The older Detective Sato in Stray Dog is much more aware of the interconnections among people and how decisions that you might make that seem right can, in fact, inflict harm on other people. And he keeps reminding Murakami about this. And so in those dialogues, you see this tension between the group and the individual that, is really deeply rooted in Japanese society.
Gotcha. And those come that pairing especially comes up for Kurosawa a lot earlier on in this period between his Shimura characters and the Mifune characters together as kind of a
in father-son, master-pupil kinds of relationships. And Takashi Shimura gave he had a kind of he was slower in his responses than Mifune, and there's a I think a stronger compassionate persona that Shimura projects than Mifune projects. And so Shimura, as an actor, was very well suited to being the mentor, wise sage kind of figure in these pictures, until he simply just got too old to do it, and Mifune became too big a star and sort of moved into the central role. But if you look at Kurosawa's two back-to-back masterpieces, Ikiru and Seven Samurai, Shimura is the central figure in both of them. Even though Mifune is the actor most identified with Kurosawa, those two films have Takashi Shimura at their center, and he is part of what makes them extraordinary. So I think he's maybe a little bit overlooked, a little bit overshadowed by Mifune, but I think he was a real key player in Kurosawa's quality of work in this period.
I'm glad you mentioned both of those actors, because I was curious where this film kind of fits in terms of the lexicon of police or buddy cop movies. I feel like, the genre is pretty cliche now, but at the point when this movie was made, I feel like it was probably early on, and this might be, somewhat of a precursor to the movies that we would most closely associate with that genre of film now.
Well, I would say that what you're describing as the buddy cop movies are movies that belong to the action genre. The buddy cop movies typically are action films. And Stray Dog is not an action film, nor is the other great police movie that Kurosawa made, High and Low, in 1963.
Yeah.
What both of these are procedurals. They're police procedurals, which is a category in which the focus is on how a crime gets solved. So you follow step by step what the police are doing to track down a criminal. And there's a kind of there's an interest of logic in following what's happening. And that's part of what intrigues Kurosawa. And he's very methodical about showing us step by step how we find, in the case of Stray Dog, the thief and the killer, and in the case of High and Low, a kidnapper and killer.
No, that's very true, and I was really struck with when he finds the thief and the killer at the very end, when Toshiro Mifune's character finds him, and you mentioned that he kind of realizes that they're one and the same. They seem very similar, even though they're kind of on the light side and the dark side. But that moment at the end when he finds him and they're in that field and the criminal just kind of falls apart and just starts wailing. There's just something somewhat emotional about that scene. Just the violent emotion that character has. It's something that's very powerful.
Yes, I agree 100%. There are many moments of greatness in Stray Dog, and that is one of the greatest of these moments, because here we've got this character who, in the hands of a lesser director, would be a simple villain, a stock villain, a figure of meanness, and let's look what he's done. He's a thief, he's a rapist, and he's a murderer. And so a lesser director would present him as a figure that we would not be drawn to. But what makes Stray Dog extraordinary is that Kurosawa is drawn to this character. And as a dramatist, he wants to understand the depth of suffering that has brought this character, Yuza, to the point where he's wailing in despair at the end of the film. And I think that kind of moral complexity, where you have a character who's done, horrible things, and yet Kurosawa, as a dramatist, draws close to that character and feels a compassion for the suffering that he's undergoing. That makes for great drama rather than melodrama. Melodrama sort of plays with simple dichotomies of good and evil, but that's not what Stray Dog is about. Stray Dog is about how a good man, this character, Yuza, how a good man becomes corrupted. And the clear suggestion in the film is that he's been corrupted by the war, that he's probably seen or done really terrible things in the course of the war. And by 1949, when the film came out, the war crimes trials were underway. So it was pretty general knowledge in Japan at the time that the Imperial Japanese Army had committed numerous atrocities pretty much everywhere they went in Asia and the Pacific. And so this oblique reference in the movie to what it is that bent Yuza, what it is that corrupted him, I think, is an indirect suggestion about the essentially savage nature of the war, and perhaps even of Japan's conduct in the war.
It also gets to that central tension between Murakami and Sato, the Shimura character, right? Like throughout the movie, they both kind of have not exactly opposite responses, but definitely responses in tension to each other about exactly who this Yusa person is and how they think he came about. Right.
That's right. That's right. Sato is very hard-hearted. He says that Yusa is simply bad, and that it's the job of the police to protect people against those kinds of individuals. And Murakami tells him that he can't think that way yet, because in the war he saw a lot of men turn bad, and I think he understands that he could have been one of them. And that kind of paralyzes him through a lot of the film. He's often thinking about himself in Yusa's place, and that complicates his ability to act in swift and decisive ways.
And that puts the ending in like a really ambivalent space when Sato kind of like gives Murakami cold comfort to say that he'll forget about Yusa.
Right, and he's standing at the window, unable to do that.
And, like looking through a small mirror.
Yeah, I mean, there's a kind of parable in the movie. Yusa is the cancer of the war. That if it is not eradicated, will corrupt and destroy the new generations that are to come, generations of young Japanese. And so it's important that he be apprehended by the police. But at the same time, he also emblemizes what the country has gone through.
Yeah, Kurosawa doesn't let it go. Yeah, he doesn't let it go without some real melancholy at the end.
Now, I know Kurosawa is so beloved by American filmmakers, and that was one of the things I took into account while watching this film. The music, the camera movements, the editing reminded me, especially of kind of the 70s big-name directors, someone like George Lucas or Francis Ford Coppola or Martin Scorsese. Do you mind talking a little bit about Kurosawa's influence on American cinema and how a lot of those names really revered him and took, some of the stuff that he was doing so well and brought it to their films?
Yeah, I think that, as you pointed out, the directors like Lucas and Coppola and Spielberg were very impressed by the boldness of Kurosawa's filmmaking. That his films, one person's movies on average look very much like somebody else's movies for the most part, right? I mean, they're sort of standardized products. There are, on the other hand, a relative handful of directors whose films look unique, that are unmistakably theirs, and Kurosawa is one of those. I mean, if you didn't know he made it, but you knew his style, you could identify the director. So I think the boldness of his work, the way he would move the camera, use wipes, his cutting, which was often very assertive, and also, his skill at storytelling, which was in part the result of working with great scripts, and that was in part the result of a system that he instituted in which the scripts were all jointly authored, and everybody was competing with each other to come up with the best ideas. And the good results that came from that are apparent in the extraordinary run of films that he made. I don't think so much that it was films of this period that were exciting the American directors. It was the films of the later 50s and the 60s. Films like Yojimbo and Hidden Fortress and Throne of Blood, where there was where there was like just a full-bodied, mature style there, and an embrace of physical sensation in terms of movement and violence that resonated for that generation of American directors.
So, outside of the cinema in the U.S., then, what do you think, or how do you think Kurosawa influenced cinema more abroad and in his home country? Because, real quick, that, like, filmmakers in the 60s that were coming up in Japan, like Seizun Suzuki and Oshima, kind of actively said, if not hated, but at least was wanting to push back against Kurosawa's style and people like Ozu and Mizoguchi, yeah?
Well, it was a generational battle, right?
Yeah.
I mean, whenever somebody casts a big shadow across the landscape, and you're a youngster who wants to make your mark, you want to find a way to step out from under that shadow. So I think that was the essential problem with Kurosawa and a certain generation of younger directors. in terms of his influence on film globally, it's probably true to say that there has been no film remade or there's been no film remade as frequently, either directly or indirectly, as Seven Samurai.
Yeah.
I think that's probably true. I think if you were to count up all the instances of remakes that are either direct or indirect, you'd find more of them coming from that film. And also, let's remember that Kurosawa's Rashomon, which won the grand prize at the Venice Film Festival in 1951, opened the international distribution for Japanese cinema as a whole. And so Kurosawa joined this great wave of art film directors whose works were being seen in all the important industrial countries, people like Ingmar Bergman and Michelangelo Antonioni and Fellini. And Kurosawa was in that group. So, I mean, that was the golden age of international art film distribution. And there's never been a period comparable to that era in the 50s and 60s. And he was right there in that group.
Now, I saw, when I was doing research on the film, I saw some quotes from Kurosawa close to when Stray Dog came out that seemed to almost paint a picture that he wasn't really that high on the movie. But then later in his autobiography, he kind of came around to the movie a bit. He reassessed it. I don't know, do you have any guesses as to why, if this is true, why he would be lukewarm to the movie at first and then make the change?
Oh, he says in his autobiography something like it was, or maybe it's in Donald Ritchie's book, there's a quote where he says he thought it was too full of technique. Maybe he's referring to the long sequence in the black market that goes on for 8 minutes. I think that would be perhaps a legitimate thing to say about that. But no, I mean, I think I see this as a real key film. It's a really major film in the early part of his career. So I don't think there's any reason to feel any reservations about it whatsoever. But sometimes filmmakers, they're not always the best judges of their own work. Maybe they had bad experiences on a film, and then that colors how they think about it.
That's always true. Kind of jumping off from that, I'll admit this is actually the first film by Kurosawa that I've ever seen. So I guess I'll just make the broad question as somebody who's written extensively about the director. Where do you recommend kind of going after this? What films do you feel like are the essential ones to really understand him as a filmmaker?
Well, in terms of Kurosawa, of course, it's not, and this is something Francis Coppola said. He said, Kurosawa didn't make only one excellent movie. He made a great many excellent films. So it's difficult to say, but clearly, I think that the finest film that he made is Seven Samurai, and that's an absolute must for coming to terms with him as a filmmaker.
Is there a bit of context you can give for that, just because of how different it may seem from this movie as more of a contemporary one to more of a samurai?
Yeah, Kurosawa had been making a run of contemporary movies for the most part during and after the war. He had made, in 1945, a kind of samurai movie, The Man Who Tread on the Tail of the Tiger, but it wasn't really a movie about warrior culture, and it certainly wasn't a movie about swordplay. And so the really startling thing, the amazing thing about Seven Samurai is that was the first. That was his first film about swordplay and about samurai action. And that's just amazing, I think. Of course, he would go on to make his name with that kind of picture. But you look at that film today, and it is probably the best example of storytelling in all of cinema. I mean, it's 3 hours and 20 minutes, and it just moves right along.
I guess that's why it's been taken from or remade in some ways so many times, because it must have some sort of resonance that just sticks with people.
Well, the narrative situation is elegant, and it's one that produces a lot of riches in terms of character and action. But in Kurosawa's film, it's also philosophically very rich and historically very rich. I mean, on this elegant foundation, he constructs this huge edifice of, culture and history and philosophy and, violent action, characterization. I mean, it's got everything. So I would go there. I would go there if you want to go to another Kurosawa.
Definitely. Dylan, do you have any final questions before we wrapped up?
Yeah, to kind of set our quick discussion of Salmon Samurai next to the movie Stray Dog, that there is, I don't want to say a hole, but definitely a tension or something that Kurosawa kind of moves around is a lot of his women characters don't get as fleshed out. And I think some of that, at least in these two movies that we were talking about, have to do with setting. But what do you think about that in terms of Kurosawa's legacy? That how to respond to that as a contemporary viewer?
Well, I mean, I think it's not a revelation to say that as a filmmaker, Kurosawa was interested in men, and he was interested in male pursuits. Lots of directors and writers who are men have been that way, and I think that a film can't be all things to all people, right. and an artist can't be all things to all people. So as a viewer or a reader, you gravitate to those artists whose work you like, and maybe for personal reasons or political reasons or whatever. But I would say that Kurosawa himself was aware of this, and he talked about it in his autobiography. He said that he felt like all of his women characters were a little bit strange. Yeah. And there are some exceptions to this, though. No Regrets for Our Youth in 1946 has the central figure, the hero in the film, is a woman, played by Setsuko Hara. And also in Ron in 1985, the little stinger that's buried deep inside the film is that everything that's happening, in fact, has been orchestrated by Lady Kaede.
Right.
To get revenge on the clan. Yeah. And so, and Kurosawa treats her like a warrior, and he gives her a warrior's end, a spectacularly violent death, which I think I would suggest is a measure of his respect for her character.
To be fair to a part, at least, side character of Stray Dog, that early on in the movie, I think Ogen is a really good character that has a very small part in the grand thing, but it does kind of inaugurate Murakami into his greenhorn self into the black market, right? Because there's this really great moment after Murakami tails Ogen for like at least 5 minutes and just kind of wears her down, and she's just kind of sitting there drinking, and then he's sitting outside alone of the restaurant, and kind of a shot that's reminiscent to Drunken Angel of him kind of sitting there by himself with a guitar playing in the foreground, and this really deep shot that Ogen just kind of goes up to them, they kind of reconcile, and she just kind of looks up at the sky, right? There's a sense of a full character in such a small part.
Yeah. The images of skies in Kurosawa movies are often images of cosmic transcendence.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Professor Prince, thank you so much for coming on and talking with us about this movie.
Oh, my pleasure, and thank you for inviting me.
And that will wrap up this episode of Cinematary. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Cinematary, on Twitter at handle @Cinematary, and on Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/Cinematary, where we post all of the movies that we talked about in this episode. Next week, we're going to be doing something a little bit different. We're going to kind of cheat. So this is episode 199. Our next episode will be episode 200, but we're going to kind of do a 99.5 thing. And we're going to do a crossover, a little cross promotion for my own thing. If you keep up with
stuff that I do. I don't know why you would be doing that, but if you keep up with stuff that I do, I also do the podcast called The Newsreel, which is hosted on cupboardfilm.com with Brian Welk. And we're going to do a crossover episode of sorts with that. We're going to have some of the fine people here at Cinematary come and join Brian and I on that podcast for a crossover. So count it as 199.5 before we do a big blowout 200th episode. I'll be talking more about that next week, but hopefully you guys enjoy this little crossover, and yeah, we'll see you next week.
All right. Thanks again, everybody, for listening. I wanted to take one final moment to remind you to check out Audible and get a free 30-day free trial just for being a listener of Cinematary. You can start your trial by going to www.audibletrial.com/cinematary and picking through over 180,000 titles that can be accessed from your iPhone, your Android, your Kindle, or even your MP3 player. Again, that link is www.audibletrial.com/cinematary. See you next week.